Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ice-Burgh Recap, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins game recaps and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins or anywhere you get your podcast from. The Pittsburgh Penguins win by a final score of 4-2 and end their four-game losing streak. Top storyline in this one was special teams from start to finish for both sides, and it actually was a positive for the Pittsburgh Penguins in an area that hasn't been in a very long time. They end their power play drought. It ended up going 0 for 37 before Jake Guentzel cashed in early in the first period to put an end to it. Not only did they do that, but they scored a power play goal later in the game that ended up being the game winner. Shout out to Jeff Carter on that one. They went 2 for 5 on the evening, and it was an asset to the Pittsburgh Penguins for the first time in a very long time. That's the top storyline going in. That's the top storyline coming out. And the Pittsburgh Penguins will look to build momentum on their power play moving forward. But let's get into the goal recap here. A lot going on in the first period of play. Jake Guentzel, like I mentioned, opened the scoring with his 11th goal of the season. A beautiful power play goal assisted from Sidney Crosby and Valtteri Puustinen, who has now 3 points in 3 professional games, 2 of them this season, the other one back in 2021-22. So Puustinen continues a pretty decent start, picking up secondary assists in his career. A little bit later in the first period, Arizona Coyotes on the power play. Lawson Krause scores his 13th, assisted to former Penguin Jason Zucker, as well as Juuso Valimaki. He picks up his 6th assist of the season. Penguins penalty kill is hurting right now without a lot of penalty killing forwards. Let's face it, that's the biggest area of need when it comes to injury right now with Noel Acciari, with Matt Nieto. You see a lot of these players go out, and I see a lot of people say, well, it doesn't matter. They didn't have that big of an impact. This is where the impact is. You see the penalty kill starting to struggle a little bit. It's because they're missing those two, as well as Brian Rust, who had been a pretty key factor on that unit as well. And it factored in a little bit later as well. Matias Maccelli scores his 5th goal of the season later in the first period, also on the man advantage. Arizona takes a 2-1 lead there. Lawson Krause gets his 2nd point of the game and a primary assist. And another former Penguin, Nick Bjugstad, picks up an assist, his 12th of the season for the Arizona Coyotes. The power play was firing on all cylinders for both teams at this stage of the game. And then fortunately, the Penguins penalty kill were able to tie things up. All special teams, like I said earlier on this episode, tying it up at 2-2. That's big Jeff Carter on a breakaway, set up beautifully by Drew O'Connor, who had a nice play at the defensive point to set Carter loose, and Carter goes forehand to backhand and is able to beat Connor Ingram for his 2nd goal of the season and a shorty to tie things up at 2, ending the first period of play. Second period, Penguins controlled a lot of the play. Penguins controlled most of the play at 5-on-5 throughout this evening, but weren't able to get anything past Ingram in the second. We head into the third period tied at 2. And that's where Jeff Carter once again comes up big for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And once again, on the power play for the Pittsburgh Penguins, Carter gets his 3rd goal of the season on a redirection in front of a Chris Letang shot. Letang picks up his 12th assist on the season in the process. Riley Smith gets a secondary assist and now is on a little point streak of his own, going back to his goal against the Florida Panthers. Penguins take the 3-2 lead, and then they shut things down, as they've done much better this season than they did in the last. They've had a couple of issues holding leads. They've had a couple of issues when they get into third periods tied up, not as much as last season, but this game, they made sure that they walked away with the 2 points. Jake Guentzel gets the empty net goal, now his 12th goal of the season, his 2nd goal of the game. Evgeny Malkin picks up an assist, and so too does defenseman Marcus Pettersson. That's where things stood at 0-0, and the Penguins take 2 points from the Arizona Coyotes, a team that was very similar to them in standing, in record. But the one thing that you had to notice going into the game is that the Arizona Coyotes did have a pretty rough road record. Penguins able to take advantage of that, get a victory before they go back on the road for a handful of games now up in Canada, taking on the Montreal Canadiens later tonight. So a quick turnaround for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Speaking of Canadians and Montreal and French Canada, let's get to our 3 stars. And the third one is going to go to the French Canadian himself. P.O. Joseph, in his first game back since November 4th, saw a lot of people burying P.O. Joseph after he got injured, said it's fine, doesn't matter, Ryan Shea is better, and that's still yet to be determined. Shea is it early in his NHL career, but I think you saw last night that there are levels to this, and right now, P.O. Joseph, when he's playing his best, is a step above what Ryan Shea is, and you saw that last night. And I don't even think he was at his best last night. I think he's still going to need to get his feet back underneath him. That's his first game in over a calendar month, but I liked what I saw. Was it a perfect game? No, it wasn't a perfect game for P.O. Joseph. It wasn't a perfect game for the Pittsburgh Penguins. They still had their mistakes. The power play still had its woes on a couple of those 5 opportunities, but it's a lot better. It's a step in the right direction. And obviously, it's easier to fix those mistakes when you're collecting the 2 points and you're winning those games. P.O. Joseph finished with 13 minutes and 16 seconds of time on ice, 58.8% of the shot attempts, and 63% of the expected goals. It'll be fun to see, hopefully for a little run here, P.O. Joseph and John Ludwig playing on that pairing, because what Joseph lacks is what Ludwig brings, and that's physicality. Although I did see P.O. Joseph a couple times last night using his physicality, separating players from pucks, and I think that's a good sign. That's when he's playing at his best, is when he's playing with a little bit of an edge. You're not expecting P.O. Joseph to take people's heads off. He's just not going to do that. He's not equipped to do that. He's a little too small to do that, but he was playing a little physically last night, and I think that helped lend to his overall game, and that's why his underlying numbers look so good last night. Not to mention he picked up a +1 rating on the evening. Second star of the game, one of the 2 Penguins that picked up 2 goals in this one. I'm going to give it to Jake Guentzel. Led all Pittsburgh Penguins last night with 7 shots on goal. It was one of those games that if he hadn't scored that early goal, you would have had to feel it all night long that something was coming for Jake Guentzel. He had a really stellar game. I think Sidney Crosby obviously had a little bit of spring in his step going up against Logan Cooley, somebody from his Learn to Play program. That was clearly the biggest storyline heading into the game. Crosby at one point undressed a defenseman for the Arizona Coyotes. If he would have scored that one, it would have went on the all-time highlight reel. And you know how big a goal has to be for Sidney Crosby to get on his all-time highlight reel. He had a great game. Guentzel, great as well. Opened and closed the scoring for the Pittsburgh Penguins, ending that power play drought early and making sure that he gets the empty net goal late as he dives to the front of the net to put things away and make sure the Pittsburgh Penguins get the 2 points. So Jake Guentzel is the second star of this game. First star of the game, can't go anywhere else. It is Big Jeff Carter. What a game for him. Whatever he ate before the game, let's make sure, and I'm sure Crosby will, because Crosby's a freak when it comes to superstitions. Let's make sure he continues to eat the same exact thing at the same exact time going forward, because 2 goals from Big Jeff Carter. The Pens are now 2-0 when Carter taps in a goal at this point in the season. Now, unfortunately, he's only done that in 2 games, but hey, it is a recipe for success for the Pittsburgh Penguins. First 2-goal game for Jeff Carter since March 22nd of this year against Colorado. The Pens, like I mentioned, now 2-0 when Carter scores a goal. It's nice to see some depth scoring for the Pittsburgh Penguins. You hope to see that coming from different areas. And with that, I want to go to my final thoughts really quickly. Not to take away from Jeff Carter. He deserves his flowers. It was a really good game. I thought he had some spring in his step, playing with physical game as well. But speaking of depth scoring, something I noticed, the Penguins in general had a noticeable jump in this game. I don't know if it was Kyle Dubas speaking to the media. I don't know if it was, more likely, the 3-day break after a 3-game losing streak on the road, not to mention tallying on that 4th game against the Philadelphia Flyers before they went out on the road. But a road trip where you came away with 1 standings point out of a possible 6, going into a 3-day break, especially at this time of the season when everybody is telling you, you got to go, you got to go, you got to go. I thought the Penguins had a really good response in this game from top down to the bottom. And I think one of those players is Ryan Graves. I thought he had a solid performance in this one. I'd have to go back and look at what his numbers were in Florida, but it'd be nice if he could start to pick it up. If he plays the way he did last night, the rest of the season, the Penguins are going to be in good shape with him on the first pairing. The problem is he hasn't been able to sustain when he's had those few and far between good performances, but last night was indeed one of them. And the other one is the third line. They had a few top-tier shifts last night, and that was Radim Zohorna, Lars Eller, and Vinny Hinostroza. I thought that line looked stellar last night. They led all forward lines in high danger chances at 5-on-5 with 4 of them last night. They gave up 0. They outshot the Coyotes 8-1 when on the ice at 5-on-5. A really solid performance from Zohorna that I thought was much more noticeable in this game. I've been a harsh critic of Radim Zohorna over the last couple of weeks. I thought he's faded back, but this was certainly a game where you noticed that he was making the plays that he's been making when you've said that he's at his best. He was also playing a little bit more physical. He was getting in front of the net. He's still not where you'd want somebody of his stature to be, but kudos to him. He came out, he was playing with a little bit of fire. He was in front of the net. He was going to the net hard. He was trying to stand up for himself, trying to be in the game in that way. And I thought he did a good job of that. And I liked what Vinny Hinostroza brought. Looking at this roster, if they're going to have AHL guys in the roster, I'd rather have Vinny Hinostroza in over guys like a Jonathan Gruden, who I thought had a pretty decent game last night, over guys like a Mark Johnstone, who looked fine in his NHL debut on Friday. But I think Vinny Hinostroza brings a different level to this. And I think Vinny Hinostroza deserves at least a couple more games if nobody else comes back from injury, like Ricard Raquel or like newcomer UC Jesse Puljujarvi, and not UC. I'm thinking Juuso Valimaki, who was already talked about in this episode. But, maybe it was Dubas' short talk that lit a fire under him, or maybe it wasn't. Who knows? At the end of the day, who cares? Penguins come away with a 4-2 victory. They need to start stacking these things on top of each other, and they'll get an opportunity really quickly against the Montreal Canadiens a little later tonight. It's the dad's trip, which means they usually play a little bit better on the dad's trip. They were there last night in attendance. Maybe that's the little mystery juice, the miracle juice, is getting the dads up there, flowing Bud Light Platinums like Big Jeff Carter's dad was up there. And maybe we'll see if they're able to go out and get a victory against the Montreal Canadiens team that is tied with them in the standings right now with 27 standings points. And then they have to prepare for Hockey Night in Canada this weekend against the Toronto Maple Leafs over in Ontario. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Ice-Burgh Recap. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins or anywhere you get your podcasts from. We'll see you guys next time.